Yahweh, ya Yahweh, ya Yahweh, Yahweh, ya Mamwigira mashkozi min nijwasing ishkore Giburawe wad Bushigo anishna bem yang mino bimadzi yang Yahweh, 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 Yah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Yah. Mamwigira mashkozi men nijwa sing ishkode. Giburawe wade. Bushigo anishna bem yang mino bi madzing yang. Yahweh, 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 Yah. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yah. I hope you like that. Hey, you might have heard a sound in there that sounds familiar.
Bonjour, Ani. Welcome. My name is Jonathan, and today I get to have the wonderful opportunity to interview and speak with Chief Midegah of the Ojibwe. In fact, Chief, would you go ahead and give us an introduction of yourself?
Yeah, I'd say Ani, you said it right. It means I see your spirit because we're a sacred people and so are you. We're sacred. We're the same people. We'd say Ginina Nana Bojo. That's where Bojo came from. And it's referring to, it's a question and it's referring to a reflection of the creator in your life. And then I introduce myself, Midegah Ogichi Da'an Ndigo Ojibwe Mung. And it's that I'm the kind man. It's what I was named from the Ojibwe peoples. And we're the ones, the Ojibwe are those that the elder brother of the three brothers said that my descendants will remember to be keepers of the faith, and I'm doing the best I can. I'd say Adik Songab Doodem, that my clan family that I come from traditionally is the standing firm caribou or reindeer family. Standing firm is a title we added to it due to what the Europeans were doing and our inability to continue to travel our trails as we did prior to try to protect the people. And then I'd say Miniwakan and Dunjaba, that my ancestors are buried in water, near water that's called sacred. This is where I would say that my roots are. And this would be the waters that are found in Spirit Lake, North Dakota, to the waters from and they're all the same water, and the waters from Lake of the Woods in northern Minnesota and southern Manitoba up to Winnipeg, and which is named after us as well. And it's I'm happy to be here with you. And we'd say people say chief, oh chief, chief, chief. They're thinking about elected people every 2 years. That's a term created by the Americans. I'm an Ogima. It's a traditionally appointed head of a clan. It's something higher. It's an example, and my responsibility is to try to inspire and influence others to be Ogimas too, to be chiefs of creation, which was your birthright. And if you just wake up, and then there's treaty chiefs, those whose families are signatories and they are lineal descent representatives of people who signed agreements with the United States that it almost is like it doesn't matter because they don't follow or adhere to it. And the American citizens don't even know what it means anymore. And the people on reservations don't even know their treaties anymore. And then, but I try my best.
Well, we certainly appreciate you, and all that can be asked of us is that we do the best with the knowledge we have. And I wanted to say that out loud. Ogima.
Ogima.
Is that like a Sikkim, or am I saying that right?
Yeah, it's a title of I guess authority, but we'd call it a responsibility and accountability to live the seven grandfather teachings daily. The best your ability, you're gonna fail, but the goal is that you just keep trying, and to remember your ancestors 7 generations to the back into the past because they're holding the hand of the 7 generations to come, and to always be speaking out as the protector today, the voice of your 7th generation that hasn't been born, that they have the opportunity to the same right that minimum that you have. And so, and right now I'm proclaiming that we're not at war with each other, that we're at war with our generations unborn. And as we are living in a bad way right now to take more for ourselves right now, we're actually taking from them. And I'm concerned about their ability to have fresh water and clean air and to experience the sound of birds and trees, as and I'm worried about it. So the ability to even live with hope. It's the last to die, but sometimes there's only like an ember left in the fire. And I'm trying to like explain that there's like one ember left, so we need to wake up.
Yeah, that has also been on my mind. Thinking of the future generations, something obviously President Nelson has also talked about is the rising generation. And recently I ran for sheriff. I lost big time. But to me, I felt like it was a responsibility and opportunity to speak up about the things which we need to correct. And a lot of my focus went towards the rising generation. And even in our small area in Idaho, there's fights over water rights. And in in all of my, I love studying history. And in my study of history, I tried looking up what the battles were that have come through this area economically, uh, and the first thing was with the Ute natives here, and they would come to the pioneers' homes, and then, oh, you guys are staying, and well, can we get something here? You've taken from our land. What are you giving back? And I thought that's a very, it's sensible. It makes sense. Like when we go camping, we want to leave the place a lot better than the way we left it, right? Um, Yesterday I was out in my field with the corn, the beans, the squash, the three sisters, the potatoes, and all my herbs, and I was just reflecting on I've never grown anything before. I've never been trained how to farm or to grow things or garden, but what I can do is that I'm learning, and so I had this recognition that at least I'm leaving this yard or providing more life in the form of food than was here before. And I took a lot of comfort in that. And a lot of that came from studying the history of what had happened here and the fights that happened here. But um, the rising generation, we do have a struggle with the core of those seven generation, the seven grandfather teachings. About 2-3 months ago, I covered this. I had a huge interest in the Ojibwe language. Uh, there's an Ojibwe man who's teaching language, James. I can't remember his last name. It's hard to pronounce.
Vukelich. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
He's it
And
too. He's a fluent like the rest of us, or we know bits and pieces, and we're learning along the way. And because it was taken away, and we know just enough that to get along, but we have to really try hard to bring it back to life. But he has done. I would say he's done more. He is the Moses of our language revival.
honestly, I just did a review on his book because I purchased his book. But it was when I bought that book, just hearing him speak, the softness of his voice, the love, you could feel it. I didn't realize this, but he didn't grow up knowing the language. This is something that he learned as well, something he learned through college. And I'm like, oh my gosh, look at the gift in this man and how he's welling up this desire and love for not just the language, but the people, the history, everything. And so I started diving deeply into the Ojibwe language and started noticing a lot of things that connected with our scripture, started noticing things that connected even with ancient Mesopotamia, uh, linguistic patterns. And I just thought, well, this is not a coincidence. But I did a review on the seven fires and um, the seven grandfather teachings. And so when I heard about you, I was astounded. I was excited. I wanted to meet you right away, even if it was just to sit down and talk. And so this is a treat for me. It's a blessing for me. And um, I really want to give you the opportunity to help teach us more.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And I just want to again thank you for reaching out, because the only way that we're going to do anything is if we make a cloud, and maybe or join a cloud. Maybe the water drops are moving right now and we're just adding on the final ones to bring the rain, but we got to be going somewhere. And it can't be like we kind of talked before we started about the impact of routines and the desensitization of importance because of routines. But that even within the own family, and you cross paths with each other because you see each other every day and you forget how sacred it is to be with each other until you lose somebody you can't be with again. And then you wish you had one more moment. So how important is each breath, right? So I'm glad to talk with you. And also, hey, don't worry so much about losing that sheriff thing. You'll get it again. You'll get it. Don't worry. You don't quit. You don't get things the first time. It takes a couple times.
It was just the opportunity to testify of the needs and struggles that we have. I'm not related to half the town like the other guy was. So
Yeah, yeah. Hey, yeah, this happens.
yeah. But I did a video of Adam-Ondi-Ahman, or a short, and I found Adam-Ondi-Ahman in the Ojibwe language, and it seemed to say Adam, buy, purchase, Undam in a path, and Amen was it breaks up into word parts, but Amen is for a particular purpose. And I thought, oh my gosh, this really makes me think of Purchase the Redeemer, the fall of Adam, but being brought back on a path, a covenant path, back through because of a Redeemer. And so I don't want to appropriate anything. I'm trying to learn. Can you help and tell me what have you seen this as well?
Yeah,
I'm just
this
curious.
this was brought. It's what's really strange is right in the 1823, right when the federal government said, like, we're getting rid of these guys. You're just going to get rid of these people. That sort of between then and 1830, in that 7-year period, this kid growing into a young adult. You're in your 20s, you're still a kid, and he just has some ideas that are really interesting because he didn't speak our language, and he didn't know what was going on in the continent before his people came, the most genocidal people in the history of the world, that were killing and murdering people on 5 continents in the name of Jesus, which is just so contrary to itself. It's fascinating. And he didn't know that what was going on before 1616, after we had in like 1612 to 1616, we had in that 3 to 4 year period, like 9 out of 10 tribal people in North America, Central and South America, like they died from like plague. And so we left as you would do today. Remember when Corona happened? Imagine if it wasn't just wearing masks, it was like 9 out of 10 people would die. Like, you wouldn't have a supply chain. You wouldn't be driving your machine to put fuel in it. You wouldn't be going to the store and see anything on the shelf. You would have to leave the large cities, and that these Spanish explorers, when they walked across North America and through what you'd call St. Louis today, that they encountered cities that were larger than London, cities that were larger than Rome, peoples that were they didn't have the idea of conquest like they did with the people in Central America. They were like, wow, this is like a very agriculturally based people. He didn't know about these things. So it's strange that he would say that we had a very sacred settlement within the area of Missouri. And we, just a news flash, people hear words and they think it's theirs. Mississippi, the Great River, is an Ojibwe word.
Yeah.
Mississippi is an Ojibwe word. And and so and, and so this is the things people need to reflect upon is, how about asking us, what was going on? I saw a stone that is coming to Fond du Lac, and it covers this migration of our people. This is really fascinating because I was sent an image of it today and said, yeah, we're going to bring it. It's okay. And it's actually a big stone. And on it, within it, like somehow set within it, like I don't know if you could melt stone to put stone within stone, are these other stones that are shaped like the Great Lakes, and carvers that's shaped like river, and then this massive circle down where you would call this place. And so what we'd call this place, we would call this place Manadu Gidigan. And it's a garden that, and when we say garden, it's the same meaning as a farm.
Yeah.
And it's a place where we grew things where they were dwelling. And it was it was one of the largest cities because the Ohio River came in from the east and the Missouri River came in from the west, and the Mississippi came down from the north, and they merged at a place that was in Missouri. This is where they came. These were highways and freeways, and we could travel from Pennsylvania, over to cover 1,500 miles faster than you could drive from like Paris to Madrid. We could go from what you would call today Minnesota all the way to the Yucatan faster than you could drive from Madrid, Spain to Paris in your little automobile machine. We had.
It gives new meaning to the Book of Mormon when it says traveled this amount of time or days.
Yeah, there's a strange racial prejudice that occurs with the European and their use of paper for books and their ideas that they could walk from Spain to Rome to Turkey, Constantinople, and along the Silk Road through the Himalayas, these massive monstrous things over to China. And they think that, oh yeah, they were doing that back and forth, but we couldn't get into a boat and zip down the Mississippi in a day to the very bottom to what you call New Orleans, and in another 2 days zip along the coastline to the Yucatan. Like, what are you talking about? Sacagawea. I had a grandfather, Charles Botnu. He was like one of the first white chiefs, and it was because he was a man of honor. Because we recognize that you're all Anishinaabe, but he walked with the Lewis and Clark Party, and who led those, so special that they just could do everything, men named, Lewis and Clark across the country. It was a pregnant woman.
Yeah.
Named Sacagawea, a pregnant woman who had a baby, threw on her back, and guided them from the East Coast to the West Coast on our highways, that were made by even deer. So, but they don't reflect on these things, and they don't even go back and understand agreements with international parties, because they think when they say they're American, they're different than the British. Why were the Beaver Wars taking place? This is just to lay some context here. Why were there such problems in the 1660s, 70s, 80s, and that led to the great Wampum Treaty of Montreal in 1701 between the English, French, and Indian? Because after we had our plague before 1620, and then the Puritans showed up in the Massachusetts coastline when that guy named John Smith had come back after he had gone to England, and he said that there were cities like every 2 to 5 miles, like massive settlements that you could see the smoke out. But when the Puritans showed up in 1619, there was nobody there. Cricket, nobody's there. It's called plague. And so they flooded into our trading routes. Oh my gosh, it's divine providence that we have access to all these things. And then our people, a generation later, they went back to where they had grown up. The kids grew up with their dads and moms and their grandparents who talked about what it was like before the plague. And so they moved back into their areas, but now there were Europeans running these trading routes, and it started a conflict. This is our things. And it was such a conflict that it forced England to sign the covenant chain agreements to make peace. And it forced France and England to sign the 1701 Treaty of Montreal, which said, okay, we know you're here. Sorry. So let's dwell side by side. So they just took a different strategy after that, which was, well, then we'll just take their things from them, prevent them from being able to have progress, and then we'll take their children from them because they don't have progress. And that was the next direction. And so, but to say that we couldn't travel is just absurd. We had the greatest riverways in the world to connect to our entire continent. And not only that, but we could also go from the Atlantic down the St. Lawrence. Think, before they built these dumb dams, we could cut in from the St. Lawrence directly into the lakes and take off from the lakes straight down through the Midwest. Sure, there's a couple parts you had to lift your boat out and walk 15, 20 miles. Whoop-de-doo. It's still faster than what they do in their little automobiles today.
We even have history of large ships being deconstructed, moved across, and reconstructed. But we can't carry a dugout canoe. That's, this one.
we found harmony with the with the Orthodox rabbis is that their sacred obligation of the Jewish tribe is to remind the children, the descendants of Noah, of their responsibility to follow the 7 laws that were given to him by the Creator after the flood. And the Creator said, there's these 7 things that are the red line that you can't violate. And that was their responsibility, was to, they were entrusted with this mission to remind those that you'd call Gentiles, they're still children of Noah. And ours, they apply directly the same. These are in the Torah. And if you read the oral and written Torah, and people, there are those, they think the Bible is it. The Bible is a fraction of the Torah. That just as the LDS have an oral teachings that are taught within their teaching lodge called the temple, now you get to watch a nice video, but this is an oral edition. So did the Jews have an oral portion that was only taught in the synagogue or the temple that they've carried on. That even Adam was given, you can do a lot of things, but there's 7 things, and from these 7 came the 10 commandments. They expanded a couple due to the idiocy of humans. For some reason we need some extra clarification in a few areas, but there's 7. And so, we carried the same things with us. And, there should always be a drop of water that's in the hand, even of the person walking in the desert, and you should value it. Well, if it's the same, then, you should recognize that. And so they helped us keep a compass, but we fell off many times, and then we came back. Prophets were called. And we've just never fully been able to share the story because it's been more convenient within the United States and in the Canadian environment to assimilate and disappear. And so when that happens, then you tell the story. It's sort of like what I'm experiencing right now, where I'm in the Midu, the traditional spiritual ways recorded in the 1640s by the Jesuits, who were the first to get to the Great Lakes. That I'm in the Midu, who even in the 1850s, they recorded what they were doing, and you would have thought that the Mormons ripped them off, right? But, I have people who are Europeans calling themselves scholars within the LDS Church that are telling me that I'm the one who's wrong, and I have to listen to them on even the history of my own family and our own people. And I'm the one on the phone talking with hereditary chiefs and clans from other nations across North America, staying in the homes of grand national chiefs and hearing the story of the seven language families. And I wonder sometimes the arrogance. You might want to take a step back. The Book of Mormon, you guys got to live off faith, because you can't, and I'll just kind of touch into this. You can't prove it. There's no book, the plates were taken away. So if what we have validates it and adds upon your faith, then isn't that the same as what you're telling everybody you're trying to, to bring on board around the world to just have the Bible? That, if we're adding and building upon your faith and grows a fruit, then how can you reject it? Well, you're doing it to the very people, or that's been my experience recently, that is being done to the very people that you're claiming to get it from. And with this nonsense that the ones who built the mounds and things like this in the Midwest, that these are a separate people, and it's insulting because it says you don't understand the Council of Three Fires established by the 3 brothers after the great Peacemaker left, who took responsibilities to keep the faith and keep the fire lit. They used those mountains for communication and to light fires. And there were those that kept those fires, and then those who kept the people fed. They were the Ottawa, because where they were traveled all in the water. These are things that's just like, you say there's 3 Nephites running around, and we're trying to talk about the 3 brothers who founded the 3 Fires Council. So why don't you pause? Not you, but it's something me and Jody have been talking about. You still there?
I'm still here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I hear you. Great.
Okay. It's funny. Scripture Central is the big name archaeological scholars on Book of Mormon archaeology, geography. And they say, well, the church doesn't officially take a stance, but they only focus on one select area. When they were covering Kirtland Temple purchase, it was less than Christ-like of me I go, well, hey, thanks guys for covering something in the heartland. I guess there is something. I mean, let's not forget. Did Moroni just randomly hike all that way for no reason? Never been there before? How was there never any contact previous?
And it doesn't
Oh,
take into account the peoples that were there and what they said themselves about what was going on there. You know,
exactly.
that the first, one of the first agreements made that was made in Ohio along the Ohio River. The Ohio River runs from central Ohio over to the, southwesterly direction to the Mississippi. Again, Missi, ZB. It's an Ojibwe word. And south of that were a people called the Muskogee. You'd call them today the Chickasaw and Choctaw and their little branches, but they were south of that all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And to the east, along the coastline, you had the Iroquoian, the Cherokee, the Tuscarora, and the 5 Iroquoian tribes of what's called New York. These are all one people. And even from them came the Siouan, as in Virginia is where their language is found, as well as up in Sault Ste. Marie in the center of the Great Lakes. And then north of them, the Ohio River, and north of the St. Lawrence, you have the Anishinaabe. It would seem that it would be beneficial for anybody concerned with why Moroni went there and what was going on to maybe ask these people what it was like before and what was their migration stories into where they were and what was their understanding of why they, well, number one, did they know about the people in Mesoamerica? And number two, were they different than them? Number three, were you ever integrated together? And number four, what caused it to break apart? And if they would have done that, they would have found that, yeah, we actually initially, had different migrations. That and when you know the different migrations, then we had a period of unity. And the period of unity is when the great peacemaker came. And then after the period of unity, we had a period of division. And that division wasn't with those in the upper northern portion who were outnumbered 10-1 by those down in the central portion, which is still the case today, but it was because of the interpretation of what the great peacemaker said. And that's why we had to separate from them spiritually and physically, our cultures. But these are questions that are never asked. And as we start to bring them up, we do find those that like to, tell us we're wrong. And, I don't know. I got on speed dial on my phone the matriarch of the Azteca, who actually is at the reserve at Palunka, those big buildings, those big pyramids down there, and wants me to always sing her songs. So I'm singing her songs and wants me to come visit. And they don't have any problem with our restored unity. And we all know what happened. When the great peacemaker said, I'm done talking with you guys on the land. I'm going to go see those in the islands now. He did go. He went to those that were in the islands in the Caribbean. And there was a group there that after, 5 or 6 generations, they came back in and we were always trading with them, but they were a little bit different. And they were a little bit more letter of the law instead of spirit of it. But maybe that's because they had less resources and they had to be letter of the law. They're
It's
forced
the
to be.
lesser.
And yeah, and so they came in from the islands and they had a different approach, which was, hey, brothers, what did he say? He said, you got to sacrifice your heart. You got to give it willfully and you got to do it immediately. And they took that as literal, like go to the very sacred places we're offering prayers and incense and lay your body upon it and we'll tear the heart out of your chest. And oh my gosh, you have saved yourself and found salvation. This started a civil war and we separated ourselves. And it's not us that it has a problem with understanding that. It's the European that forgets that when the Jesuits came in 1640s and spoke with us, they were afraid and they verbatim reported, and people can go read, they thought we were going to make a new Bible. Well, isn't that what came out of it just a couple centuries later with Joseph Smith, right? Our story. And But this is a little bit of what was going on. So he was going up to friendly territory and he was being hunted. Yeah.
Is that found in the scrolls that your families have?
There are hundreds of scrolls, and they're kept. The migration said go west because you got to safeguard the things to make sure like something exists at the end, like something. And in the scrolls, as well as oral and written teachings of all those people up through there, even the Haudenosaunee or the Muskogean or the Anishinaabe, these are a part of the culture. The scrolls that I personally carry, they are far older. They talk about more about the first man and woman, and they're used in certain portions of the lodge to remind you that once you leave that teaching, that you have the same responsibility, accountability, and rights equally as the first mother and father upon the earth. That God doesn't differentiate between your right and the first man and woman's right. That you have the same right to walk the good path with Him. But yeah, the history's there, 100%.
Is it written in red ink?
No, they didn't do that. They didn't do that way. So when they either used like plates of tin. These are recorded in the even 1850s, but plates of tin, plates of copper. We had like massive copper mines. Okay, massive copper mines. Copper, even plates of gold. That's not unknown. I don't even know why people trip out over that. Okay, we used it. Like, what are you talking about? When they used birch bark, what they would do is take copper and heat it, and they would write upon the birch bark with heated copper. And so this is how they did it. They didn't use like an ink, and so this is something that's more of like the ink thing is more of like a European thing. Yeah.
Okay. Because recently I had seen a Christian podcast up in the Great Lakes in Canada,
Yeah.
and they were showing images of birch bark scrolls telling the creation story.
Yeah.
But it looked like red ink, and it showed mound and showed man
Yeah.
and how man and mound were. So I didn't know if these are
Yeah, it's not
similar
ink.
or
It's burned.
okay.
It's burned, and it's kind of strange how it works. I stare quite a bit at the scrolls I have and think like, as they were making these things, how'd they do it so nice? It must have been very sacred to them. They take their time. They're trying to tell a story. So we had levels of a first layer, which is a song, and it's supposed to wake you up and remind you. We somehow reason we thought that you were connected with your ancestors. Now they say today there's like a genetic history carried in you, right? And it's carried in your DNA, that these certain things. So there's a song portion, then there's an oral portion, and the oral portion is the symbols actually represent. They're another layer of communication. The symbol represents like a sentences, but it's specific and it'll always be the same every time you see that symbol. And so if you were to have a codex of these symbols, you could go anywhere and see. If you saw them, you could read what's said, and you could even sing a song, right? And so
Also,
that's how it works.
were there also because the seven different verbal languages, there was still a
Yeah.
uniform hand language, sign language, which was used,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I've heard it's been attributed to even some of the characters for your writing, like
Yeah,
the sunrise
absolutely.
and the sunset.
Absolutely. Well, it's symbols to have a shared understanding. Even the things like the some of the tokens you get in the temple. And I'm not sharing anything sacred or secret because it's part of my culture. We used to go to villages, and when you came to a village, you'd have to present yourself at the outskirts of the village. I'm just going to share one with you. The square,
Yeah.
right? The square. That's a symbol. Okay. And you'd have to go to the square and you'd have to extend your hand. And you'd have to stand there and wait. Okay. And then when you dropped what was in your hand, because there's something you had to have in your hand, you'd wait. And then an elder would come from within the city and they'd do the same thing. If they didn't do that, if they instead lifted both their hands up, you turned away and you walked away because they didn't want you coming into the village. This was even a symbol. It was a spiritual connection if you could enter into their spirit family. And many reasons why not. Maybe there was a sickness. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe whatever. But yeah, this is, even when they were meeting in the 1800s, the very symbols that were drawn were the same ones they were talking about. And they would do these things. Now, I'm not an expert in it. I'm not a sign language guy. I probably was destined for it if I hadn't learned to talk again.
That's
But
right.
I was very lucky, very, very lucky I could talk again. But yeah, and
You
I
had a
have said
Moses
that I
experience.
have, what's that?
You had a Enoch or Moses experience.
Pretty wild, man. And the funny thing is it was like the first moment that I to kind of jump on that trail. But yeah, that was the first moment that I realized I was like a grown up. I had a clarity of mind that was the same as right now because of what had happened. And I remember it like as if there's not a day, there's not probably a 5 minute period I don't think about it. But that's such as trauma, right? There's a certain post-traumatic echo that comes with it. And so I take a lot of honor in being able to speak. And maybe that's why I don't shut up.
Turns a weakness at some point into a great strength. As
Yeah. You work the hardest at it because people for some reason think that if you can't talk right, that there's something wrong with your intellect. And we do that with people of other languages, well, mostly the European, especially with how arrogant they are related to the language of Spain. But this is something they carried over with them from Europe, where they had so many wars between the Protestant and Catholics, and it was mostly led by the Protestants in England and the Catholics in Spain, and those in Spain carrying the mandates of that Pope over in Rome to go and teach a lesson to those protesters up there in England. And so there was a hatred for each other that they brought over and have instilled within the peoples today, calling themselves Americans, beneficiaries of an Italian explorer. And you are even speaking negatively against a tribal people in Central America, whose people have always been here and are speaking a European language that is not European enough to be acceptable because of these Protestant Catholic biases that are now ingrained in your culture. And this is something that's so arrogant because the Denata, the Navajo, that's the name the Americans call them, because it's just absolute disrespect. But it's Denata. They're actually found up in Northwest Territories in the Arctic Circle, and they migrated north-south. And even the Apache are Denata. They're the same. They're a branch of the Navajo. And if you knew anything about the Rio Grande, the reservations bridge both sides. And so really what they're doing is saying that this river determines the humanity, and their big way they push it is Spanish. And we've all seen it. They treat people who speak Spanish as subhuman and idiots. But remember, these are tribal people that had a European language forced on them. And then they had a culture of migration that to go be with their family that we're trying to restore our unity that is being prohibited by another immigrant, and it's generational descendants of immigrants doing it now to people who have no ancestor from across the water. It's kind of rich to think about it for a minute. Strange.
so, um, in Doctrine and Covenants 88, it says to learn of all countries, languages, from the best books, wisdom, literature, right? And later on in Doctrine and Covenants 111, the brethren are admonished by the Lord to go up to Salem, Massachusetts, and study the more ancient inhabitants of the people there and the first colonizers, settlers. And they are in need of financial, they have financial needs. But then the Lord also says that there are great treasures there, implying a spiritual treasure that is to be had. Yet, maybe it's just me, but I never saw a follow up or what that blessing was. Is they went there and left them empty handed and did not inquire, as far as is written down, of the more ancient inhabitants. So I started looking into that, and it's the Namkig tribe. I believe they're a branch out of the Powhatan. And like you said, plague wiped out. The place was called Place of Fish, or a place of fishing, and plague wiped these people out, which seems to be a pattern of every time there's a migration of people, plague comes. We see it in the Book of Mormon. I'm not sure if we've correlated it with migration of new peoples coming in or not, but and we see the settlers come in and they contact the leaders there. And they called the leader, I think they called him a moon god, because I think he had the name Nana in his name somewhere, or Inanna, a Mesopotamian moon god. But I think it was in your language. I was studying this the other day.
It's symbolic. So like
Its face watching over, just like the moon never rotates. It's always attentive to.
but there's a symbolism there, like even with Nana Bojo. And this is a character who's, it's just a sound, but it's a character who is reflecting completely the light of the creator with symbols around us. We're in a classroom. We're in a temple. It's a 6th direction temple, and our 7th direction, which is our spirit inside, is experiencing this projection. And as the sun would be representatory of the creator, the moon would be representatory of the reflection, and not reflecting its own light, it's reflecting the light of the creator. And so he was somebody who, if you were to understand it in that context, he was somebody who was reflecting in his life, truth and goodness and kindness, life giving. The light touches the seed and gives life because he's walking the true way. So it's symbolic.
You really can tell that he did live that, because this person, the plague, took his nose. I think he was the son of who is known as King Philip, with King Philip's War, and this son was sent into slavery early on down in the. I think he dove down for I think it was pearls down near the Caribbean or Florida, and then came out of slavery and returned to his people. And you could really tell that this person, the title, it wasn't just like I got a really cool name, I've got status. It was, this is expected of me. This is who I am. This is my nature, my stewardship. And I think this is often lost when we lose the spirit of things. Too often I see going through the motions or check boxes on a list, but then completely miss the spirit of it. And then there's people who are not checking off all the boxes, yet have the spirit of it because it's what they're longing for.
And then they're a little more honest. They're what you call they're a willful participant in being a professing sinner. And what they usually find is oppression from those who check the boxes, literal sense of the word, and they are called professing saints, that are usually the ones that have the hard hearts. And so you would sometimes, but they're the ones that have the card, right? To push a little dagger in, that many of those who carry a little card forget that a piece of paper can be tossed into a fire and it doesn't replace the requirement to walk the spirit within your heart with each other. And I have experienced a lot of love from LDS, and I'm not just a tribal person through my father. Through my mother, I'm a tribal person as well. Martha Smith is one of my ancestors of my mother, and she married Hiram Bell Bennett, who's a Pamunkey Indian. And that nation is in Virginia, and their lineal descent and they're federally recognized, which only means that they qualify for services with the executive branch. But remember, there's 3 branches of government that are co-equal, and that one isn't greater than the other. And so if you're recognized by Congress under a treaty that's under Article 6 of the Constitution, that's just as meaningful as a recognition by an agency under a Department of Interior of a man who sits on a cabinet of the president. Or what about there's a point to this. Or what about a congressional, or what about when you have the Supreme Court who affirms your rights, right? And so, just to point this out, because there are those that attack me about my identity, when there are 575 groups that the executive branch talks to, but there are 975 that are recognized by the judicial and Congress, and over 400 who had their communication dismissed in the 1950s. There are 55. This is just because it's only the Mormons that attacked me as the son of a father. And I'll talk about this letter of the law thing in a minute here. Most Mormons, I'm just going to be the one to newsflash you. There are 55 tribes with 80,000 people in California alone that don't have the dignity of their reservation or communication with the executive branch because it was arbitrarily dissolved in the 1950s. Up in the Northeast, you talk about the place you went with the Powhatan. This is Wabanaki, Abenaki land, the people of the Eastern, the Eastern Star where the sun rose. What about those people? They were told from the 1950s until 2011 they didn't exist, and then they were re-recognized in 2011. Oh, just Indian one day and not the next, and then the next day they are. So, spirit of the law versus letter of the law, right? And so that this is something I just want to say that I've experienced as I'm trying to just be a nice guy and talk about things culturally that we share in common and that we can prove. And there are those that are so letter of the law with their check mark. They think that if I don't match the same, and they do it, listen, they do it with each other. Are you worthy? Or are you unworthy? Are you active or are you inactive? Based on what? You know my relationship with the creator based on 2 hours on a Sunday? What are you talking about? I'd certainly say that 1% of your week doesn't encompass the relationship with the creator, right? And so these are why are they doing these things? We're doing it today. It's happening today. And I'm not sure that it's right. You know, I don't know where that's going with this, but I just thought I'd bring that up.
No, I know I definitely know what you mean. I'm the last active person of my family, of at least the kids. My parents are still active, right? But I spent about 4 years not attending church, where I'm not saying I was more better off then or anything, but I certainly went through some personal struggles, which led me to study the scriptures even more and to pray even more. And I felt ashamed to come into the church. I felt embarrassed because I was focused on what somebody else might think, and not so much of what the Lord thinks. Uh, Ultimately, I to me, I don't care whether I personally fit in or not. Um, I go to participate and to share and partake of the ordinances of the sacrament personally. So I I understand where you're coming from. Where I feel,
Yeah.
closer. It doesn't mean I'm less or more worthy here or there. For me, I take it as personally what I did is take it as a measure of sacrifice and go, you know what? It may be hard on me, but maybe I can help somebody that's there.
That's right.
Um,
And it's a personal walk that you have with the creator. You know, whether somebody has amnesia spiritually, they're just completely blind. They don't know any different. You know, if you were born in their life and had to experience the people that were surrounding them and the environment they grew up and go through the forced experiences before they became an adult and could make control, you'd probably be just like those people. So the question is why so much judgment upon them? And even those that agree the same as you, that you are a tethered spirit that was lowered, which was kind of new in Christianity, but it was like the core of our teachings. How did Joseph get that right? Anishinabeg, that's what it means. That you are a spirit in a body, Oji Chagwan. How did Joseph get that right? And that you're trying to live a good way. That once someone's living the good way, you don't then try to find a measure of, well, who's living it better than the other. You're already in the circle. You already know the truth. And you're not, and we had people that were called as judges too. These were elders that when you went to the teaching lodge, that there was a personal sacrifice. They would on a daily basis ask you to profess the things you weren't doing right with somebody qualified to measure them against what is right. And then based on that, you'd have to get like rebaptized in a purification lodge, and you learn the power. And depending on how bad it is how long it would take to go through what you'd call a sweat lodge, which was a baptism. You go back into a womb, prepare yourself to go in. But what I found is fascinating, myself experiencing this, is when I left the building of the church for a reason. And I'm a tailor and I'm a smith and I'm a millet and I'm a clothier and I'm a young, that I went to where I felt love, right? and within my ancestors. And I was still walking into a lodge. I was still being taught the same things that they do. And so I'm not sure that we're all going to hell in a handbasket just because we don't sit in the six-sided walls, the stones that are stacked, when it's probably more important the hearts that we can link together. That's a building in and of itself. And I think that they should remember that. And because I say this because, before I came on this little path, Jody, she's a family member of mine, a relation connected on every tree. And we keep in contact about some things, and usually spirituality, because we kind of see things eye to eye. And I was doing something else. I was just honoring my ancestors and saying we have something to share internationally. We're trying to sit at the table of the human family again. We've been vetoed twice by the United States, in 1920 at the Indian League of Nations to try to join the League of Nations. Woodrow Wilson started, got rejected. 1943, 44, 45, 46, we then had 200 nations come together and say, well, maybe if we speak with one voice as a North American Indian nation, that we'll be able to get access. And we had like the majority of the United Nations at that time reorganized, supported us, and the US vetoed it. And so, since I was called in 2018, the elders that were a part of it, and who were the ones representing those 200 nations, it was Jules Sioe, it was William Commanda, Bernard Commanda, these great Algonquin chiefs that were chosen to speak for all the nations. And William Commanda is somebody so famous, I'm surprised the Americans don't even know who he is. They make fun of him to me. It just blows my mind. Mostly members of the church. That he was considered the head chief until 2011. And our goal was to try to get into the United Nations to have a voice, to try to say, hey, we need to temper and restrain yourselves a little bit here. And so I started talking about this in 2019, and I got attacked at that time I ended up in a blog. People attacking, always starting a new nation. It's like, you don't even know your culture. You don't know our culture. You don't know what we're doing. We're just trying to have a voice in the international community. And so along this path, I ended up meeting with some rabbis and signing something we share in common, which was that we were 2,500 years ago, we had an event that how we are is because of how they are. We had a unity moment. And I was going to go around the world to tribal organizations and groups, indigenous groups that have already been visited for like 60, 70, 80 years by other big chiefs. And we're just finishing the job to have a new council. And then I got asked to go and talk at this Ojibwe conference, and the Mormons were there. And I said, oh, this is interesting. We got something in common. I can share something. Adam and Eve really were from the continent, that the great Peacemaker Jesus did come, that there were three men who had strange bodies that founded the Three Fires Council to make sure their descendants always remembered the teachings, and it existed in these times, that there was things we had in common, right? And we got some scrolls that might affirm that the Book of Mormon is true, but it's only like a fraction of the history, and maybe you should accept that. And I would say that it's been a mixed bag. And I just want Latter-day Saints to understand something now that I can, calmly talk about this. Before I had even come to the Latter-day Saints, who claim to be the real Christians, claim to be the ones that value the heart more than the checklist, that certainly seem to be valuing the checklist more than the heart right now. That I went to large Christian denomination organizations of 3,000 churches. I never had one person question my right to be the same identity as my father. I never had one person attack our people, not a single person. 3,000 churches. And these alliances that respected us. And I never had one person that had me produce papers to prove that had the right to my identity of being my father's son and my grandmother's grandson, like paperwork, like it's 1930s Germany. I never had one single incident. And yet, or overseas, whether it's with groups in Asia or the Pacific, or talking with kings of the Maori, or, things like this, that never had, or kings of tribes in Africa, never had one incident of somebody saying, prove you have the same right as your father. However, within the big heart, Jesus loving Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I had a mixed bag where I've received over 800 emails. I've received over 800. They've collapsed our email exchange, our accounts, locked them twice. And they all seem to be from the same group, and they seem to be focused on how we don't have a right to say anything. And their way to try to do that is that, oh, Midegah isn't an Indian. Well, my father is J. Douglas Barker. I don't know if you can see this. Let's see if hold on. This is important because this is important to me. This is my dad right there. This is my dad. Okay. When I was a teenager, this is my favorite picture. So when I was a teenager, my dad was Superman. No, my dad might have been in jail. He made some mistakes.
He
But
gets
because
out
he was,
soon, though.
what's that?
He gets out soon, though.
He gets out in
Right.
October. And oh, by the way, yeah, there are some people who have written some emails that are pretty big names that just love their Mesoamerica so much they want to attack me that, my dad's excited to personally meet them. He's super excited to have them tell him that, the relationship between a father and a son is for a white person to judge if it can exist. And I think they might find that they won't be so slick with the tongue in those moments. But this has been my experience coming back as a tailor and a smith and a clothier and a millet, is that I've been asked to produce paperwork, and I say, what kind of church are you if you do that? Is this, you do these things? And then, but then I talk with, and this is important because I'm going to talk about this in Utah, is I talk with my rabbi friends about it. And I say, what do you think about this? Church has to grow. And I hope to be a part of that. That there's a reason the church can't be in Israel. And the reason that the church can't be in Israel is because they claim to have a mandate to adopt Gentiles into Israel. So why would you adopt Israel into a Gentile tribe to be a part of Israel? Why would they, you understand that, why would they do so? Well, the same with us. Why would you expect us, as if we claim to be tribes of Israel, why would we need to be adopted into Ephraim and Manasseh, which were for the Gentiles? Why? Now, the response has been, and this is the big attack, and this is straight from Orthodox rabbis who talk pretty eloquently, but they have no problem with the Latter-day Saint Church. They think it's great. The goal is for Israel to be gathered. And there are those that have been given the keys to gather the Gentiles to Israel. Everybody understands that. I think they can reflect on that and say that makes sense. The problem is when you want to gather Israel to make them a part of Israel. What are you talking about? They're already Israel. And so they say, well, you lost the authority. And so I did have a message from the rabbis that I'm going to be sharing, which is, they get told that the priesthood they had went away when their temple was destroyed, and that all the priests standing around it when the temple burned down, that their authority just was gone. Right? We've heard this. Well, I'm pretty certain that when the Nauvoo temple burned to the ground, that those priests that were standing around didn't assume that their priesthood was taken away, if that was the measure of that being the way. So these are things to reflect upon acutely, that there are blessings that were promised to Israel that they cannot receive at the moment because they have not restored their temple. And when they do, and they make the offering and sacrifice again, that those blessings will return. And that will happen when they're capable of doing it, as they also deal with secular government. But likewise, to say to the Midu, who were founded by travelers 2,500 years ago, who gave us the star, which is two overlapping stars of David, and made our clans matrilineal with children that were integrated in, and taught us the lodge, which is the same as what you do in the temple. But we did it first. And then the great Peacemaker affirmed it. And he called teachers. 3 of them founded the Three Fires Council, the 3 brothers who then went and traveled the world. And we just want to I want to remind those of my other half of my family who have a authority that was granted by Peter, James, and John, and Elijah and Moses, that in the Kirtland Temple, which I can't say I disbelieve it because I had family members there. Artemis Millet built that temple in Ohio. Martha Smith was there. She was recorded in her journal as carrying the plates with Hiram out to the barn to hide them under the floorboard when the people in the local village came to take them. So she knew it was true, so much that she, as a white woman, married an Indian named Hiram Bell Bennett, a lineal descendant of Pocahontas. And because of that, I qualify today for the Pamunkey Indian Nation of Virginia. But I honor my father. And they said that these people appeared, and they wrote about it. And so, and these authority that was granted to gather the Gentiles into Israel, that it was from the people that gave it to those on the other continent. And I just want people to reflect on that if you have Christians running around the world murdering people, that if Jesus wanted to center that, he would call within that group those to give the proper authority to correct them. And then generationally by generationally, temper them and restrain them to be less and less racist, less and less genocidal, until the point that their hearts were prepared to sit in the circle of the human family again. And we certainly know that Blacks weren't allowed to have the priesthood until 1978. So, that's irrespective of being an Anishinaabe, a spirit lowered, a spirit in a body, and living the good way. Racism was alive and well, generation to generation, as it was removed, until we get what is a really good generation, which is like mine, me and you. We're the same generation, and we can sit as equals and talk as equals and show some respect. But certainly nobody on this continent gave anything back. And we may have dwindled due to genocide and corruption that occurs elsewhere. But those 3 men never gave theirs back. And neither did any of the other 9 show up and give something back. And these are things that should reflect on. And now the second thing, and I'll be quiet, is I get a tremendous amount of email stating that they were just disciples and not apostles. And I just want to say that, well, they were, according to the Book of Mormon, if you say it's true, that they received their authority to go and found churches and to perform ordinances and with people from resurrected hands of the great Peacemaker himself, not from a man dwelling in a body who would then become resurrected, right? And people should really reflect upon that. And so if we are showing up and saying that we have something to add upon what you believe, but also to correct you a little bit, you need to restrain yourself a little bit with your fanaticism, because even your leadership says, follow Jesus. Your leadership says, follow Jesus and read the Book of Mormon. And they're only saying it to your people. They're not talking to the world. If you go watch the conferences, they're admonishing the membership. And they must be doing it for a reason, because I've had a lot of membership ask me, Midegah, David, how come you don't follow the prophet? Why don't you follow the prophet? Why don't you follow the prophet? I follow Jesus Christ. And lest people not forget Exodus and the oral Torah, the grandfather of the Bible, which is the grandfather of the Book of Mormon too. It's also the grandfather of the Quran, where if you read the oral Torah, when Moses took his staff and stamped it and commanded the waters to part, nothing happened, because he was pointing direction. He said, when you cross the waters will part. The people stood there. There was one man who said, you said we have to cross? As people were getting ready to fight, go back, or find another way. And Moses said, yeah, we're supposed to go to the other side. And one single man, and go ask an Orthodox rabbi, they'll tell you all about it. They teach it in their synagogues. He turned and started walking. Oh, fine, I guess I'm going to the other side, right? Because Moses said, this will happen if you follow God. And this one guy walked into the water, and the water rose all the way up to his nose, and he paused, and he took one step further. The second the water went over his nose, the waters parted, and then the people crossed. The blessings that you want in your life cannot happen unless you take the steps to follow God. And you have to go to the very moment where the brink of you're going to fall off a cliff. And then that's when the miracle happens, because you're acting with faith. You're doing your part. You're praying, acting in faith that it's real. You're relying on the Spirit to do what you will never be capable of doing. And then you do that because you trust that the Lord was telling the truth. And don't forget how sacred you are. You are comprised of lots of atoms, little balls of energy, that if one of them is split, it ended an entire global war. And yet, who are you that these things are you're painted within? And so that's what I wanted to share, to try to hijack 15 minutes here.
No, I think these are conversations that must happen. We received no witness until after the trial of our faith. The gathering of Israel, the covenants, everything. It's a gathering into covenant. This is something I've come down to understand, and I've talked about and released videos on recently. But there's a reason why half the virgins are unwise and half are, and it's because the power doesn't come in the piece of paper. I was a state trooper. I was a felony parole agent. I've stopped people coming out of a strip club who showed me their temple ID, and I'm like, I really don't care. That means nothing to me.
Yeah.
I'm not your authority, and I just saw where you came from. So I'm not asking for this. So why are you giving me a serpent when I'm asking for a fish? But I will speak to. We do have a record of priests of the temple throughout the time of Christ's birth, just before that, and a bit after that, and it goes on a cycle. And these are found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this kind of indicates to me that there was a group who came from out of the temple with records and hid it.
Yeah.
Because we have the temple records. Now, on top of that, in Doctrine and Covenants 117, when we purchased Kirtland Temple back, nobody talks about this. Oliver Granger was promised he would be made a I can't remember the word, but he would be blessed for his sacrifice. And basically what he's doing is selling off all the assets and settling all the debts in Kirtland. And it tells us to hold on to those weightier things. Doesn't specify what those weightier things are. To me, those weightier things are the keys. Now, the keys were given in the Kirtland Temple, but the endowment, the ordinances were performed in the red brick store. And that temple was desecrated. But the Lord said, I will redeem this in my own time. And what happens just recently? We see that this investment, the sacrifice, all comes back, and it's a fulfillment of the Lord keeping his promises. And it's because, hey, don't worry about the physical things. I gave you keys. I gave you endowment. I gave you power. And it's to help you endure and go through the things which surely shall come. And we come into Salt Lake, and we spent 40 years building another temple. In fact, the day that we entered into that temple, or into that valley, it was some people who were ahead of Brigham Young. But it was Brigham Young who came in later and said, this is the place. But the day those original people walked into that valley was the same day, Tisha B'Av, I believe it is, that the Jews mourn the loss of their first and second temple. And then 40 years later, even having to bury the foundation and everything, and then replace the foundation. And here we are today, having it reconstructed and secured for the millennium. I see a lot of parallels. I see a lot of parallels with the Israelites and what is in their time in Egypt with what has been happening here as well. These 400 years of wandering, Abraham was told, would happen with his posterity. These past 400 years that us European colonists have come, and now all the world has come. The things that preserved the early natives, the ones that were preserved, it was this value in friendship, camaraderie that secured the lives of many Europeans. We don't know what would have happened if European ships kept coming back and everybody died every time. or what wars would have, what things could have taken place here if there was no colonization and gathering. And I see a huge parallel with Egypt specifically, and the blessings of Manasseh, who is his name means forgotten sorrows. Is that correct? And in the blessings of Ephraim to gather all of Israel. I believe that the hardship which the Israelites faced in Egypt, first it was easy coming in and integrating in, and then came the enslavement, and then the departure, the need to detach and worship freely, and then the 40 years wandering, and then the founding and then return to the Holy Land. In a way, I kind of feel like this is happening with us, and it has been happening, and that we do have a deliverance coming. Yeah, but even Joseph, when he received his brethren into Egypt, despite the tribulation, the hardship, rising through it, and then being batted back down, and then being lifted up again by Pharaoh, which means great house, he forgave his brethren. And from there was preservation and still hardship later, which came from the future Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh means great house. How is America named after Amerigo Vespucci, the name Amerigo? And that means house rulers or rulers of the sovereign homes, and a work ruler. There's variations of it, and it made me really think of how the posterity, Joseph, how they gathered here in this household, this America, Pharaoh's household, you might say. But this for a final deliverance, and this deliverance being in covenant, this covenant path that we take. The living of it is where the power is, not in the signatures and everything. That's the accountability here and record keeping here, but it absolutely is in keeping the covenant.
I would just ask, along that path, that you have a little more restraint with the tribal peoples and their traditional history and beliefs, who have lost not just their property and their culture and their language, and God forbid, their right to their family and their children, that didn't come back until the late 90s in Canada and the late 70s in the USA, the right to even go to a hospital, the right to not be forcibly sterilized. They say, why is there not so many of you? I don't know. Why'd you kill so many and then sterilize 60% of them in the 60s? I don't know. Answer riddle me that. But that the last thing that would be the most traumatic is to tell people, as I have been told by a tremendous amount of saints, that, again, they should probably be professing sinners more than professing saints. They might get a little bit more. That that we have to have a spiritual loss as well. And I don't think that the European has everything to offer. We weren't the genociding people. We were the ones that were responding to genocide and then blamed for that response. But the church should be very careful. And I am speaking directly to the leadership, and my message is to them. I'm an Oshkabi West, a ceremonial messenger, and one who's authorized to speak. And they should be very careful and wary about telling our communities to give any more away, especially our spiritual identity, when it precedes yours, which is mine, half my family, and builds upon what you have, and it would take away if you removed it. That show a little bit more love and kindness to us, who because of us you've been given much, and until we're restored, your story is not done. Your responsibility, what you're held accountable to, is not fulfilled until we blossom in the desert we've been placed upon generationally. But again, you've already done it once. You walked into a desert with water that was salty and could grow nothing, and you blossomed as a people based off of ideals you garnered from the ancestors of mine. And so now's the time for you to, instead of focusing on things of stone, as I watched I've said this many times, the Provo Temple being torn down, and it's going to be restacked. Maybe perhaps this is symbolic of the time, that it's time to assist in us building the temple of our family back together, one person at a time, and we certainly could use some support. And if there's an unwillingness to support, then what is their willingness to do? How will it happen otherwise? And so this is sort of the message coming.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, in some of my earlier videos, speaking about the Seven Fires prophecy, and one of the things I said is, I don't know why there's such a huge focus on Mesoamerica and all this attention here, but there's no effort to preserve language, and maybe there is that I don't know about it.
Not.
I said if I was in that position, I'd be helping. Why does not the church offer to help preserve language and records and people?
Hey, riddle me this. We have our reservation, we're sovereign
Sorry.
dependents.
And I'm not
And
speaking negatively of the church. I just
no, you're fantastic, because you're actually pulling the direct thread. And as a seminary instructor, you know where you're going with this. That we have our curriculum in our schools, that this 12-year thing forced by the Department of Education. It within the tribal communities, we're not allowed to add our language into that curriculum. And this is horrific. So we say, well, we want to build, language centers. Canada and the US goes and builds language centers all over the place. We want to build it. We can't use any federal funding for that. Well, that's all we have. We can't even manage our resources. We can't negotiate the resources we have with any entity. Only the federal government does, and they keep them in trust, and then they manage it, and we get the little they give back. They make trillions of dollars a year, and they give back a couple billion collectively. Something to consider and reflect upon acutely by the American. How come the church can't willfully choose, since they like to build things, to come in and do an act of kindness and to build language centers to assist us, that they give us the authority to conduct and run, not them for their own personal gain, but by helping us stand up again, won't it benefit them? And who is going to be the willful participant in this great endeavor, and where we can have a sacred place to place our records. Right now, if we bring our records out and I say, they say, bring me your scroll to a university, I'll never be able to touch it again. If they say, bring a scroll somewhere for, give it to us to look at and observe, I'll never get it back. We'll never get it back, because we're not qualified to have our own things. Even right now, I have the message of the scrolls, like the 4 that I have. There's a song and a teaching. And I already know what it means. And yet, within the church, a drastic amount of those who have held very nice positions like being looked at, that say, well, give it to the seers and revelators to translate for you. We already know what it means. We just would like to have somewhere to put them that's sacred and safe, that we still maintain. What are you talking about? This would be a great way to go. They like to build buildings. We have a housing issue, and there's not enough funding from the federal government to build housing. Some communities that where my family's from has 200 boarded up homes, and they only got $300,000 total for housing. What are you going to do with that? Right? So why wouldn't you come and assist us with our housing problem? You like to build things. Isn't it easier to reach somebody's heart when they can breathe? Wouldn't it be easier to bring them into your family if they didn't have to worry about their families being taken away and torn apart over their poverty and their homelessness and their housing issues? Right now, 6 out of 10 kids that are in the Midwest in foster care are Indians, and they're less than 1% of the population. Why? Because they say that we're too impoverished to even keep these tribal kids in our communities. In Canada, 8 out of 10 kids total, 8 out of 10, 80% of all children in foster care, non-Indian families, are tribal kids, and yet they're only 3% of the population as a total. So it's like, and they say, why is that? Because they say we can't provide anything for our children. Well, why is that? If we go back to the 1701 wampum, where we had the Indian in the middle of the French and the English, and if you take our things and you make an agreement to pay us for those things, and you don't pay us for those things, we drop a level. If then you blame them and take everything else from them, how does that heal anything? Somebody has to participate. And they got to do it without trying to take something away. And I would certainly hope that the church considers this acutely as they go and build another building that'll be mostly empty the majority of the year. So something to reflect upon, right?
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, when I study other language, and I have no gift of language. I mean, I've taken tests and things, and it says I'm very good at picking up patterns and things like that. And that must be why I love scripture so much, because I just see how interconnected it is throughout the world. And the more and more I learn, the smaller and smaller the world seems to me. The greater and greater love I have for people I don't know. And I look at the scripture and it says the Lord has prophesied to every nation throughout uh, throughout every nation of the world. I mean, to us, it's just interpreted or through the lens of a culture, maybe and it's you know not the way it was purely given, but the way we have it now is that the way God Himself would speak it into its purest form? Probably not. It wouldn't probably look as European. It would, but there are specific things that I think we gain from the synergy, and this is why I think there needs to be some form of. I mean, we got BYU School of the Prophet patterned after the School of the Prophets. Why not do that to preserve these languages? I mean, even the words that Joseph Smith used out of the Book of Abraham have such significant cognates within the Ojibwe language that it's hard for me to ignore. But uh, things must be learned by the Spirit and through the Spirit. At the same time, we have things being discovered by people digging up things with their backhoe in Iowa, and it has writing of ancient people. But all of a sudden, nope, not credible. It was not
Yeah.
dug up by one of our people. So
And yet,
therefore,
and yet, the first peoples the United States recognized and called the five civilized tribes were the Muskogee, who dwelt south of the Ohio River, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, down through Missouri and Kentucky and Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, and that they were dwelling in harmony with the Potawatomi, those that kept the fires, to light the path between the communities, which is why we built these mountains. They were for communication, by the way, and during the day they would wave flags. It's just nobody asks that they are the ones that came from the south and integrated with us, and they were a vast population and a highly advanced civilization recorded even by the Spanish explorers that walked through the land were in shock that they were integrated fully with the Anishinaabe, and then later came the Iroquoian along the coastline who had came from the central portion. They had escaped up into there, and so you're finding remnants of these people, and it's bad enough you've torn down and it's bad enough they've torn down and used the very stones that were their dwellings to make streets and buildings and fences. But to act as if the plague of 1612 to 1617, this decade period, to act as if that can remove an identity recorded by Spanish 100 years prior, it's just arrogant. And it's difficult. We're used to theft. You look at the United States, they came and took the three-house government from the Iroquois, right? And even the three brothers, when they crossed the St. Lawrence, went to the Great Lakes and established the three-house government patterned after what they saw from the Great Peacemaker. Our symbol was also the eagle. And so these Europeans took our three-house government and said, look, we have something new in the world. No, you copied something. Plagiarism, the world's best plagiarizers. Then this next thing is you take the symbol of our people upon our very land, and then you say we never existed in the first place. There's something about that's repulsive, and it's something that I just can't let go and forget, that there's a responsibility of the generations found within that great house, as you called it, to make things right and make amends for the mistakes and heal the scars upon the hearts, which won't ever happen until we can stand again. And standing again doesn't mean setting aside your entire ancestral history and integrating. That doesn't heal things. That brings more scars. And so, that's sort of what the song I wanted to share with you is. It's called Unity. And it talks about together we should be strong. The seventh fire has lit by us, and we all have to speak our language in truth because we want to live well. And and you're my brother. Like, the skin color means nothing. We are spirits. We put our hand together and our hand touches the same. We are spirits that were lowered, placed into a body. We're going to live a good life and gain an identity, and then we're going to go back from whence we came, beyond this place we're in, which is an illusion of light, which is the seven spectrums of the photon, bouncing around and create a matrix we walk within. We can't see the other side of it yet, but we certainly hope that if we can perfect ourselves as brothers and sisters, that perhaps it will roll away and we can dwell in the sky world, as we call it, and bring heaven to earth. But it's not going to happen as long as we keep trying to tell people that there's a river between us and you have to leave the land you're on and stand on the land I'm in, even ideologically, even if it's the same, because the river is watering both sides equally. So have some humility. And humility says, and this is humility, it's the fourth law of Noah, it's the fourth grandfather teaching. And it says, what the Creator has granted, has given, what you have obtained on your walk is not mine to take from you. And the last thing you should try to take are the promises the Creator gave to each other's ancestors. And so, that's why I'm here to speak for mine, but from both sides, that the two sticks aren't together yet. And they could be together. We know that's the direction it's going, but it's not. It's not there yet, and this is something to remember. We got to get there. And we see on the television that beautiful light box. You got two snakes attacking each other. Now's the time for us to say, well, we don't want to be a part of the snakes attacking each other. How about we just be brothers and sisters? Are you, let me ask you a question. It used to be like black, white, red, and yellow. And that was the big drama of division. Well, now it's red and blue. Pick one, right?
Oh yeah, those.
Are you red or blue?
Well,
You
here
know,
I served in the Republican GOP in Idaho, and 2 years ago, there are some very disturbing things happening. the The devil doesn't care whether you're red or blue. I learned very quickly that there was a very good, prestigious, high high position man, LDS, who was also working within the GOP and was put over in DC and given a position with the Biden administration. And he loved the position so much that they asked him to write a paper on how anybody who supports Orange Man, for this is who they used, Orange Man, who is LDS, specifically LDS, that they are a threat to society, to democracy, and would necessitate government intervention, meaning that we'd be classified as felons, and it's easy to turn people against Latter-day Saints. It's easy to turn other Christians against Latter-day Saints.
Mhm.
Different, all you need is a side. So I contacted this person and found out about that because I was contacting him because I was worried about him about something else, which helped him avoid. But and I'm not sure if it was my conversation with him, but it wasn't the spiritual consequence of what he might possibly do to harm Latter-day Saints or even a faction of people. It was the outward threat that would happen, because if he followed through, being in that atmosphere, it's a big story, but he would have been committing tax fraud if he followed through. And I was trying to,
Yeah.
he didn't listen to the spiritual portion, but as soon as tax fraud, it's like, oh, well, yeah, it's probably, and I thought, oh my gosh, how are you blinded this much? Are you honeypotted this much? And something I do want to say to my viewers, I have seen things, negative comments about Chief Midegah here, asking, well, what was the word? Is he authentic? Is he who he says he is? Is it real? I'm like, do I ask you if your genealogy is real? Like, we
Yeah,
celebrate
I'm
we
a
culture everywhere else. Why not here?
yeah. So here's the thing, I want to mention this to them. I have three daughters who are Hawaiian. My first wife was Hawaiian. The Hawaiians aren't under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're not under the Department of Interior. They didn't take a reservation. Neither did the Tongans, neither did the Samoans, neither did the Fijians, neither did those of Polynesia. And
Yeah,
so my
cool folks.
question, yeah, so my question is then, and then knowing that the executive branch has willfully chosen on their own to dissolve services for 400 tribes, do their children not have the right to the identity of their parent just because the executive branch says we're not going to provide you services anymore? And and is it a monarchy of the executive branch, or does federal recognition come from the federal government, and is not Congress the federal government, and is not the Supreme Court the federal government? And these 400 groups, they have recognition from Congress under treaties as well as in case law with the Supreme Court. And so when you tell people that they attack people over their identity, you should be a little bit careful, because are you also ready to attack Polynesia? So my family is from the Red Bear Pembina Chippewa. We were the smallest branch of the peoples who made the 1863 Pembina Treaty in Old Crossing. My grandfathers who signed that, one of them's grandfather signed the 1789 Treaty of Fort Harmar in Ohio. His name was Chief Puanakam. His grandson, Chief Joseph Montriel, signed the 1863 treaty, along with his great uncle and father-in-law, as his great uncle had a daughter later in life that he married. And so he became his father-in-law too, Chief Red Bear. Now they had a child. That's my grandmother's great grandmother. And in 1892, we had still not received our reservation. If you read the 1863 treaty, there's an Article 9, that says that in exchange for 11 million acres in Minnesota that you people like to use in America, that it was going to be exchanged for a reservation for my specific family. 29 years later, in 1892, it was not provided. We then found ourselves living within the band of another group called the Turtle Mountain Chippewa, and their agreement was made with them called the Macomber Agreement of 1892. They were selling 9 million acres, which is the northern half of North Dakota. It had been in negotiation with the United States since August of 1889, even though it was converted to a state without owning the land, which is against the law. That occurred in November of 1889. So finally, they had an agreement in October of 1892, and Red Bear didn't sign the agreement. So they added an Article 8, that stated, and the Red Bear will get their reservation from 1863. So there's an agreement with Turtle Mountain and their reservation that affirms that ours existed, and it never came. And so we lived within their group as a small minority. In 1964 and 1965, Louis Delorme, the grandson of Carrie-Anse Delorme, the first cousin of Chief Littleshell III, the president of his council, took all of the Pembina tribes to the U.S. Court of Claims. I just want to address this right now. The United States Court of Claims determines if you still have rights and if the government has to pay. And the government stated in the Court of Claims ruling that any prior recognized body, regardless of how small, is a properly identifiable group. Just as you would say, I'm sure you would say, Jonathan, that if you were the last American citizen existing, you'd wrap your body with that flag in the Constitution and say your rights extended sea to sea and couldn't be taken away, right? So they said that these rights existed. And not only that, but no group could take over the rights of the other. So Turtle Mountain, Red Lake, the Pembina, and the Little Shell were separate. So in 1971, to address this, the United States Congress passed an act stating, well, who could? Think about the United States Congress passed the resolution 6072, report number 142-92, that outlined which families that were within the Red Lake Reservation and Turtle Mountain Reservation could speak as authorized treaty chieftains for the rights of the Red Bear family, as they were not abrogated by Congress, and these people were still found within the reservations of another people. Remember, Red Lake got their reservation treaty in 1889. Turtle Mountain got theirs in 1892. Red Bear got his in 1863 and then was secondarily listed under Turtle Mountain's treaty in 1892. And Congress said, this family speaks for the Red Bear chieftainship. That's a treaty chieftainship. And that was my family, as 5 of those 6 families listed merged into one family. That's my great-grandfather, and then was his son, my great uncle, who was the brother of my grandmother. And I was selected to speak in his stead from both of them for those rights. And they were real enough for me to file a temporary restraining order in the District Court of Washington, D.C. to stop a $60 million payment called the Pembina Judgment Settlement related to the 10 million acres that Turtle Mountain was selling, to affirm one question. If our rights to the 640 acres within that have never been provided, if that 9 million acres is sold, are you abrogating and taking away our rights that have never been provided? And on August 27th of last year, Judge Thomas Hogan, Randolph Moss, and one of the other panel of judges, 3 of the 5, ruled no. David Taylor's a Pembina Chippewa in the Pembina database. David Taylor and his family retained their rights from 1789, 1863, and if they feel those rights are abridged in any way, have access to civil court for lawsuit against the federal government. So my father is registered at Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation. My grandmother, my aunts and uncles, I am called a member descendant because they count blood quantum as 1/4, knowing that all of your ancestors back 3 generations born in Canada are called zeros and their children 50% because they're Canadian Ojibwe and you're American Ojibwe. So I have a blood quantum of 1/8 when it really should be like 30%. It's okay. I don't care. It's an arbitrary thing they created in 1934. The fact is 300 of the 575 recognized service-provided reservations under the Bureau of Indian Affairs are lineal descent. Mother to child, father to child. And I have those right. And I'm enough Indian to be Indian there. And I have a certificate degree of Indian blood, CDIB, and you do not, meaning that I am an Indian and you are not. I am the son of my father. And how dare anybody try to break or step within or question the sacred spiritual bond between a son and their father. And to do so is repulsive. Secondarily, that's where my treaty rights come from and the family that I'm from. And I carry that CDIB, and it can be affirmed through the Great Plains Bureau of Indian Affairs, whose regional director is R. Glenn Melville, who's already written a 3-page letter on the fact of my ancestors in the 1940 roll, who are my grandparents. That's my family, and you don't have the right to tell me that I don't have the right to sit at the table of my grandma and grandpa or my aunts and uncles. Who the hell do you think you are? Secondarily, my grandmother is a matrilineal clan mother from a Doodemog. It's called a clan. This is the traditional governance that existed before the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, the one that they sought to ban. This is the traditional governance. It is called Doodems, clans, and it is the matriarch, mother to daughter line that picks her headman. She could have picked my Uncle Dave. She could have picked my Uncle Rick. She could have picked my dad. She could have picked my great uncle. She could have picked his children. She picked me. And who is she? My grandmother, Patricia Breen Brunel LaFountain, is the daughter of Mary de Harlay, who's the daughter of Marie Paul, who's the daughter of Adelaide Breland, who's the daughter of Joseph Grant, who's the daughter of Utinawasis Adik Songab, recorded by the Hudson Bay Company as the female chief of all Anishinaabe, also listed as her, in her name means Star Woman, a bloodline. And that's my grandmother's matrilineal authority line, since I know in the LDS Church they like authority lines. Secondarily, she had a sister named Mache Quiance, Adik Songab, her Doodem, and Mache Quiance. She was a part of the Nehiawat, the Blood Confederacy. Utinawasis is Ojibwe Cree, and that means Utinawasis means woman of the star. Mache Quiance, her sister, was in the Ojibwe, the chief female matriarch, and it means woman of the star. And her sister, Takomi Good, was with the Assiniboine, married to that chief, and her name is Takomi Good Adik Songab, and her name means star woman. And Takomi Good married married Charles Joseph Bottineau and had Marie Bottineau, who married Francois de Jarlay. And that line is where my grandmother, Mary de Jarlay, gets her last name, de Jarlay. Not only that, through my great, and she married Marie Paul, or he married, John de Jarlay married that line from Tacoma Good, married Marie Paul's line, the matrilineal line to Utinawasis. And so I have two lines from one family on one side. And on the other side, through my great grandpa, Elmer Patrice Brunel, who was a chief, was Chief Red Bear himself, Chief Joseph Montriel himself, his grandfather, and and Machi Kwayans Adik Songab with Chief Puanakam, who had Isabel McGeezy, who married Joseph Montriel Sr. of the Abenaki, who had Joseph Montriel Jr., the Savage of Montreal, Joseph Savage Montreal, who signed the 1863 treaty, who married the daughter, Margaret Dakota, of his great uncle, Chief Red Bear, and had Julia Turtle Woman Montreal, who married the Brunel family, who were the descendants from Little Shell and Medweganoonind at Red Lake and the Little Shell tribe. I know who my ancestors are, and I know the table who I'm sitting at. And if you don't like it, you better learn to love it, because it's the way it is. I was born in Nez Perce County, Idaho, because my grandmother was dragged in 1948 at the age of 9 years old from Belcourt, North Dakota, to the Carlisle boarding school in Kellogg, Idaho, 1,500 miles away, where she then met my grandfather, who had his own story. And then because they were afraid that the country was going to take their children, they went up to Alaska, where my dad was born, in a territory at that time in 1958, so that they couldn't take him away. And then my grandmother had to stay away so that they wouldn't take the boys and put them in boarding schools. My father met my mother in Idaho, and then at 2 years old, he made a mistake as a 19-year-old kid and went to jail. And so I was raised in the Northwest, and primarily in Nez Perce County, Idaho, where I spent a lot of my time in the Nez Perce Indian Rage with the Nimipu, who are Ojibwe and speak Ojibwe and are Seven Fires Prophecy people who traveled west following the Seven Fires Prophecy, where I went through lodge and sweated beginning at the age of 15. You cannot tell me, as a European descendant, the family that I have a right to sit at, nor ask me for the paperwork. My birth certificate is my right. It's the heart within my chest. And who the hell do you think you are?
Something I have to say to this is amen, too, is what do we think will come from additional scripture? Genealogy. This, if we can't find the value in what Chief Midegah has just told us about his ancestors, then we're not prepared for further scripture. That is my opinion. I am interested in genealogy, specifically the genealogy of further scripture. Chief Midegah, I know I've taken a lot of your time, but would you be willing to speak a bit about the scrolls? I heard that someone is traveling with you to protect the scrolls. And can you speak to the date, origin of when they're written, or any of the contents?
Well, I'm going to bring one of them that you'll see in Utah, and then I'll bring four of them to Wisconsin. The Midew from the West Coast all the way to we had a call the 7th East-West Conference led by Chief Phil Lang Jr. of the Chickasaw. They're Muskogean. They're our brothers. They're our brothers. They're the ones that came across there's a migration story we never talked about, but we know who when the Nephites would have been, the Lehites, and they would have broke into two groups. That people need to remember who's the father of Nephi and Laman, Lemuel and Joseph. Who's the father? Right? Lehi. Are you trying to break their connection with their father? They're Lehites too. Wake the hell up. Okay? I see this. No one's gonna break the. Imagine if someone tries to tell my sons who talk to my dad that they're not the same as their grandpa. People crazy. So, especially those who talk priesthood authority. So the week prior, they're actually having a meeting in the Mi'kmaq Nation on the East Coast, where the Seven Fires Prophecy came, and they're currently building the Grand Lodge right now, and they're going to bring everything that's left there, and they're going to pick what they bring. I have seen 2 stones that are going to be coming, and these are pretty sacred and significant. One of them actually shows where, I guess you called it Adam-Ondi-Ahman, but it shows where that city was built by the first people, and it's in Missouri. the place of many hills. It's actually in Missouri. It's right where those rivers meet. But that was the hub of the rivers, the freeways. Right? So that's coming, that stone, so that they can see that physically see a strange map. You'll see how strange it is that stones shaped in the same shape as the Great Lakes are somehow embedded into stone. Like, I don't know how that happened. The scrolls, I don't know how old the scrolls are. That one they recorded in 1850, a chief talked about it and he wrote a book. Brian Nettles kind of read it and talked a little bit about it, where they like every 15, 20 years, they open these things up and look at them. The ones I have are very brittle. And it's almost that you can't roll them anymore. They just sit flat. And on the back, we had to get a special it's a special fabric that holds them together because they fall apart. And so they're fairly old, but it's the same message that's been shared. And the symbols on are the same symbols you see everywhere else. And so I'll tell you the symbols and what they mean. And you can start building your own codex, white people, so that you can go and read our stuff properly and understand what things say with authority instead of trying to figure it out with your own judgment, which generally is based upon nonsense. And but they will be choosing which ones they bring a week later to Wisconsin. The guy who's coming, he's the Chief Midegah, currently acting. His brother was before him, Jacob Wawati, and Jacob Wawati was on the council of William Command. They're from the Gitche-Gittigan Reservation, First Nation in Quebec. These are actually the people that they were moved north to a place called Maniwaki. This is important to know these people. These are like the Middu, like the head Middu, who sat with me when I met the rabbis to try to show the rest of the world like I'm a real guy. Right? I'm a real person. And if anybody wants to question me, like, I don't know, call the Bureau of Indian Affairs and leave me alone. But again, remember, I got 3 daughters that are Hawaiian that are pretty concerned. Are you coming to attack them next for claiming to be Hawaiian? Because they don't have paperwork from the federal government. They have their mother and grandmother and great grandmother, and they have a valley on the Big Island. So I don't know. But they're bringing these things to Wisconsin. This was the headquarters of the people who kept the faith, called Ojibwe. This was the elder brother of the 3 brothers who had founded the Three Fires Council in the 1st century. The oldest scroll that has been found is in a museum, and it's called the Scroll of Shup Shawana. He was a Potawatomi. That's an Ojibwe too, but with the responsibility to light the fires. Those are the things in the mountains that you find everywhere. Those mounds, why they were there. And he states that in 796 AD that the 3 council fire was like an empire. So it's pretty remarkable. And but these 3 men, these 3 brothers, are people that the LDS should really reflect upon. That perhaps who those 3 people are. And we have a story about them too, especially the younger brother. But they'll be bringing those things. And I don't know which ones they're going to choose to bring. I don't know the ages of the ones they're going to bring. But I know that they're going to expect people to treat respect and with dignity and with reverence, because these are the teachings of our teaching lodge that were given to us by our ancestors.
Okay,
so I don't know.
Are you presenting?
Mine's got to be mine's got to be some hundreds of years old with how brittle it is. It's just, birch bark lasts a long time, but the ones I got, literally, I get terrified every day. I keep them between 2 stone plates because I'm terrified that it's just going to fall apart. It's just going to break apart.
So, I also heard that you're going to be presenting or speaking with an apostle. Is that correct? This week?
There has been a request. We'll see what happens when I get there.
Okay.
Based upon some of the hate mail that I've received, mostly about those trying to make me produce papers like I'm in 1930 Germany.
Gosh, I don't even get
I'm
that.
not sure that we'll see what happens. I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on both sides, but I will say, the membership really showed true colors here. I just want to remind them. I just really want to remind the Latter-day Saints. I spoke at a conference in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto, when leadership from 3,000 Christian churches came together and met also with tribal members to include a leader from the Haudenosaunee. And that was the Iroquois. And that was significant. I don't know if you've seen the video on YouTube. I actually made a joke that if I'm being honest, we're all Anishinaabe and Ojibwe. And this guy was like, whoa, 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 because there's an issue between us and the Iroquois. And then I told him, maybe you should get on the other side of St. Lawrence. But that's where he actually is the one who gifted me this rainbow band to remember who we are. But I just want you to know that not a single request to produce paperwork from not one person in those 3,000 Christian churches, not a single email, not a single negative comment or challenge, because they made sure they were aware and understood what was going on with the tribal peoples in Canada and the US before they opened their mouths. And they knew who my father was. So why would you ever question? You have fathers and mothers, and do you know your aunts and uncles and your grandparents and your fathers and mothers? And wouldn't that's your family, right? Wouldn't you have a problem if someone said you didn't have a right to it based off their ideas? I think you'd be like pretty furious about it. But I just want you to know, LDS, not a single, not one. I got over 800 from you guys. And I got thousands more negative and comments and videos. So I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I don't know. I don't know who
Yeah.
those people truly are.
Yeah.
They're not saints. They're Mormons. I'll say it like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a weird. There's weirdness here that I've never
Remember?
experienced.
Yeah, and they should remember acutely. And it seems like it's destined for them. Is the story of the Good Samaritan, where the broken-bodied man was laying next to the well, and and the first one who come was those with authority, who was supposed to be acting with the heart of the Creator. That they're running the teaching house, and that priest said, "I guess he just deserves what he got," right? And it was the lowest. It was like a female Samaritan that assisted him. And it just seems like the church needs to remember them. A portion. I don't want to chastise 17 million people over what seems to be a large group. That God deals equally with the widow, beggar, orphan, and professing sinner, as with your spouse, child, sibling, and professing saint. And perhaps more professing saints should understand it's more important they're professing sinners, because we all fall short of the glory of God. And it's a gift we don't deserve, and we should be thankful we even have the ability to do these things. So maybe take a moment to breathe and reflect on that. And I'll close this. Again, I'm enough my father's son and enough an Ogima in a traditional Doodem to have representatives from the Mid-Dew Lodge sit with me with Orthodox rabbis, and to stand in federal court for treaty rights in Washington, D.C. So don't think that I'd be afraid to stand in civil court in the state of Utah with you. And if the transgender community of men claiming to be women and women claiming to be men can get a lot of money for you challenging that, how much more so you challenging my right to be the son of my dad and my grandmother? Reflect on that one. And we could have gone another way as well. There are those that wanted to, and I want you to acutely be aware of this as well. You claim you have something sacred and special in your teaching house called a temple. You claim that you have a Book of Mormon from the peoples of the continent. That's all fine and well. And you claim that people from the Jewish tribe came over. That's fantastic. You can say all you want. But you can't attack the Indian when he's arm in arm with the Jew. Because we certainly, and I'm saying this with kindness, Jonathan, but we certainly could have just said, well, let's just go to civil court and pull out our scrolls that are older than 1823 and our Mid-Dew Lodge records from the 1640s that are older than 1823, where the things you're doing are recorded as being done with us, and we could have claimed spiritual and cultural appropriation for profit at the midst of a genocide. We could have done that, and we could have done that with the Jews standing with us and said, you can't reference Indians anymore, and you can't reference the Jewish tribe anymore. What would have happened then? Is that what they want to happen? I don't think so, but I just want them to reflect on what they're really asking for.
It's certainly what the devil wants.
Oh, absolutely. We don't want that. Hey, we know that the only reason that the world's in chaos is because the red brother, the yellow brother, the black brother, and the white brother, who are all brothers, aren't sitting at the table together. And we are grateful that the gospel came within the culture of the psychopath genociding everybody, and that there's such unity now. I mean, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has refined 5 continents of people. It has unified Polynesia. It has unified a great deal of the American continents and the Asian continents with an idea that is unique. And that idea is that we are spirits that had a pre-existence, and that we have an existence in an earthly body, and that we will go back with a purpose. This is magical. It's a miracle. And if we could all realize that, maybe we'd be in a better place, right, Jonathan? I think so.
Yeah, I think we subvert organized governments and just unite as a one people.
That's right.
Our love for one another, our Zion. I was looking at the Oneida people. This is actually where I learned how to plant. Is seeing how these people came together and not listening to stuff. Not they came out into a field, children with older people, uh, and they just worked the land together. And that land, they learned of everything. They learned how to grow corn and how to read the weather, how to do all these things. And I just thought, why can't we have that everywhere? Like these people looked truly unified. Different neighborhood, same people.
Yeah.
I don't see why. I spend all day telling my kids, stop fighting, stop fighting. Why are you fighting over stupid things? And I'm less than Christ-like at that point.
Oh, I get it.
And I
Yeah.
feel like that here. I felt like that when I worked within the GOP. I felt like that
Yeah.
all the time. And what's it going to take? I mean, I criticize that. I need to be called out just as much. But we need to have, and I hope I say this correctly, Menajuin. Menajuin
Yeah.
is a respect. Go easy on each other.
Yeah.
We need to have all of this, Seven Grandfather. All the
Menagerie.
things that we say we believe, we need to live.
Yeah. Menagerie. Yeah.
There's no power without living it. We learn that
Yeah.
as in our youth, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I hope I can meet with you again. Part of me wants to go down to Utah and just meet with you in Spanish Fork and hang out for
That'd
a
be
bit.
nice to. It'd be nice to meet you. And by the way, I like talking with you. I work. I'm an odd guy that's up all hours. So if you have more questions, you can ask, and I'm okay with
Oh,
it. But I certainly would
I
like to
got
meet
stuff.
you too. Yeah, ask questions. It's okay. And I I had to take a couple days to calm down because I do want to emphasize that there's no greater sin you can commit against somebody than to challenge their family. And because you're challenging the very heart of what makes them love. And
Challenging being children of God.
I had a tremendous amount of Jody knows. I actually had an interview with Zion Media and Shane Baldwin, and I said, you got to delete it because I was so angry. And and Jody knows, and I had to dial it down. I had to calm down because it just makes me so angry that the people that I'm of their family feels that they benefit by attacking me as a messenger when I come from a people that can take everything from you that you hold special. And we certainly could. But we're here trying to add and build upon. And we're trying to do it with love and kindness and say, oh, you guys got an amazing opportunity. You can be a part of us blossoming in the desert just as you did, because we're making a decision this fall. And the decision we're making is using this. We're not going to act like those crazy people overseas, lifting up arms and going to war and doing it. We never do. We don't do that way. We're going to use your elected systems that you gave to us. And we're having a mandate on our future. And that's in regards to our language and protecting it and our family and protecting that and eliminating the status and quantum laws that you don't apply upon yourself. Imagine, imagine, if in America you can be from the East Coast and West Coast and your child of those two people is fully American. Yet for us, if we're from two communities that are Indian, we have to pick one and the person's called half. And these are things that were used to convict the Nazis in the Nuremberg trials, the very same charts that have been deemed by the international law as violations of genocide. And yet they're still upheld in your culture, and you still ask for these pieces of paper. But we're going to do these things. We want to manage our own economic prosperity and our own development, our own things. We want to have our own systems. We want to have our own Swift, our own banking application, our own marketplace, our own Amazon, our own supply chain and logistics applications. And we want to integrate and speak as one from coast to coast, as your cities do. And we want to do it side by side, not harming you. But it's clear to us that we're the only ones that can do for us that the American and Canadians will never do for us. And so we want to join the international community. And so we're working towards that this fall. with elections. And that's another thing that we're trying to state, is that we need assistance in that as well. Because we know immediately the second we do that and we tell the Bureau of Indian Affairs, you can go away because we won't communicate with the Department of Interior. We're not property, Jonathan. That will communicate with the State Department, state to state. That will communicate on our resources in a negotiation where we have a say. Even that court case last summer, Jonathan, I should just tell how unequal it is. I served in the Marine Corps for 14 years. 6 ranks meritorious, combat veteran, won a DOD award, all services for what I did there. I achieved a bachelor's and master's degree. These aren't like bragging. They're these things that somehow are decided as something that qualifies you to have a voice, to be heard, you know, and so, which is sad, very sad. But, and so,
I have none of those things. I have nothing.
No, it's
I have a
okay.
backyard.
And you know what? And we are equal. We are equally connected and tethered to the Creator. There is nothing better with me than you. And yet in Washington, D.C., as just something, a side note, was I mentioned something to the judge. I said, you know, that 9 million acres in North Dakota that you're buying for $60 million, you know, it was 9 million, and then the 11 also in Minnesota. It's like 21 million acres. That's valued at $2.86 an acre that you're buying it today in 2024. You're paying a people, 40,000 people, for 21 million acres, $2.86 per acre, the price of a Big Mac per acre. And yet the minimum valuation of an acre of land, if someone sold it, would never take $2.86. And yet, because the court says it's fair, our voice is ignored. And we just take something because it's better than having nothing. And we know they'll give nothing too. And so this is the strange thing where it's dehumanizing. And it's just further proof that it's alive and well. Secondarily, I do want to state another reason for us to unite this fall and to fulfill what we would need to do. I call it Project 24. It's listed at midegah.org down at the bottom. Project 24, it says a 2-year plan, a 2-stage plan that we want to do quickly. Is something to reflect on, as I spend a lot of time in Germany because my sons are part German. Now, just because their mother is a German, they were born in the US, they get German citizenship and a German passport. Something to think about, right? As people attack me for being the son of my father. You know, Germany, it would be repulsive for the world to assume that Germany would use any laws that were written by the Nazi government in current legislation or decision-making, right? If you tried to justify a decision today and said, reference some law from 1930s Germany, the world would be like, that's repulsive. Germany would never do it. And yet we know that from 1789 to 1920, in the United States, only white men who owned land were considered citizens that could vote, and that the policies of the courts, and no one will deny this, were specifically designed to dehumanize Asians and Blacks and Indians, that these were policies of genocide. And yet today, the courts rest every single time in every court case upon decisions from that period to justify their decisions today. And at what point will we accept that secondary dagger in the heart and say that they're not getting it? You can't take a policy or a ruling by genociders committing genocide and use it in the modern age to justify not fulfilling obligations. It's not right. And we have to control our own destiny. They tell us if our children can be in our family. They assign partitions of us and tell you you're a part of your family. And they do it in an arbitrary way that they wouldn't apply upon themselves. The equivalent of what we go through, Jonathan, is if the American had to go through it, then anybody from a different city that married each other and had a kid would be considered half American because they came from different cities. Reflect on that. And if you're below 1/4, which could be 2 generations, you don't get a vote anymore. Would you accept that? Would you believe that that's the destiny of your children? No, not at all. We don't have these rights today, and we're going to take them. And what are they going to do? You know, are they going to level us like Israel's doing Palestine?
Well, I know all nations will fail.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the meek that inherit the earth. One way or another, 100 years from now, there's a population collapse.
Yeah.
We need water here. 50 years, not so much. Not fighting over water. But our children are going to be brought into a world with far more infrastructure than they can manage.
That's right.
And there are certain things that matter most. And what matters most, in my opinion, is the strength, is strong moral youth, this wisdom literature. The things I want to see for my family in the future is I've tried doing the moving and shaking and trying to change things on a larger scale. And that just makes me a target, and it's lost me everything that the world has ever offered. I have everything that the Lord has offered, and that's more than enough.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to see is curriculums teach our children something complex of language or meaning or stories. Uh, my wife and I are putting together our curriculum for our kids. We homeschool, and we're going through the different nations and people of the earth, and but trying to find almost like a children's version of those stories, especially like the ridiculous, gruesome stories we have in Europe, the Grimm stories. Like,
Yeah.
can we find something else? Like,
They're horrific.
can
My
we?
my son my son
Something
showed me
got
one
kind
of
of
them. I read it scared out of my mind. How do you sleep at night reading that stuff?
like we can't read this. Do some King Arthur, which, in my opinion, King Arthur is a generational apocryphal version of the temple procession. In my opinion, that's what I see it within these knighthood groups, Masonic things, the Druze, which is I'm not going to get into that, but I would like to see what I saw among the Oneida back east, how they came together. They had a curriculum. They had just people in that community who were like mothers and fathers to everybody. And I thought that's the community I always wanted. That looks like Mr. Rogers to me. Why can't I have that?
Yeah.
And here I live in what is called Zion, and I don't feel like it's Zion.
Yeah.
So much so that we're trying to move out east.
Yeah.
But I would like
It
to
used to
see
be.
because things are going to collapse. Things don't last forever. But if we have a heart, the families, if we have our families and our communities, covenant keeping people, people who understand the spirit of things and not just the check boxes, if we could bring those together, or at least just get the spirit of it, at least the thing that matters most, it's the living it that brings power.
And
If
it's not the mothers. The mothers already know that their strength is in their generations enduring. It's we need more Ogeechee, dog. We call these warriors, and a warrior isn't someone killing somebody or fighting in war. A real warrior is somebody who's defending and supporting their family and the unborn generations. That's using his strength today. And it used to be
strong
that these
heart,
hunters, yeah, these hunters would just because one hunter is more capable than another didn't mean that he kept more than another. It used to be that the hunters went out and they brought the hunt back and they fed all the community together. And the bigger the hunter, he carried the eagle staff. And the eagle staff is this big, tall staff of authority that's curved. It looks exactly like the Exodus staff that the Jews have. It looks exactly like the staff that the Pope carries around, right? The key authority. And it means you're setting an example. But we have too many warriors today that because they're capable, because they were gifted with maybe a strong intellect or strong physical strength, or they have maybe a gift of endurance and persistence, right? That they view themselves as more special. And so they get the bigger car and the bigger house and the bigger things while up on the hill while the community goes further and further into struggle. And they think, like the Samaritan, oh, they deserve it. It's what they earned. No, because if they had been born with your gifts, they would be you too. But they weren't. So why don't you be a real Ogeechee dog, a real warrior, and give your resources together? The laws of consecration, it's not communism or socialism, it's love.
yeah,
And
yeah,
this used
yeah.
to be how it was. This is how we were. They broke us, but it used to be that no one starved or went hungry, and no one was without a house. We taught the Amish how to live that way. The Amish come together, and when someone's an adult, they build them a home. Yeah, maybe improve and go do your own thing, but we gave you a starting point. They got that from us. And yet that doesn't even happen today anymore. And so, we need more war. It's men. And that's why we use the feather. And that's why the thick side is the lift or descent. And we've been doing a lot of descent, and it's because of greed. But the face of greed and the face of love, they look real similar. They both have a smile, right?
This is in some fires.
Yeah. And so it's important for us to remember that the only way we're going to get out of this is to heal mankind, men, what's in your heart. And we need these warriors that are within the church to actually be Yogichida, to actually, to be for the community. You're not blessed with your gifts that are sacred for your own gain. And maybe it was better they were given to somebody else. They could have been. And then maybe they'd be looking at you saying, because you didn't have them, you deserve what you got. Nobody, this is something we have to really solve. We should know better within the church. Hey, next question. Where are we going here?
Next question. I could talk to you forever, honestly.
I like talking with you. I like your personality.
I do want to. I do want to mention to the audience, Jody is here. I've spoken with her on the phone and through text, and I love her, and I can get to know her as well. I've enjoyed my time talking with her. It helped me feel heard. I'm someone who feels like they're not heard, or when I'm heard, it backlashes. My mouth gets me into trouble all the time. People don't like that. There's a few. I mean, I call this the haystack because Monet was a French painter, and he painted a lot of haystacks, and there was a lot of people are like, what's his obsession with these haystacks? It wasn't exactly the haystack he was fascinated with. It was more the light and how he's displaying it or being reflected off of this backdrop of the haystack. And he did it in different times of day, different seasons. And my hope is it's not what I or even Chief Midegah says specifically. This is not a court of law where we meticulously dissect each other. But what I hope, is that we understand the spirit of what is meant to be said, the spirit of what is felt. What is something that you're learning, or the spirit teaches you, regardless of what we have said? What is something that you genuinely feel? And I rely heavily on that because I have so many inadequacies. I'm wildly mediocre. But the things that matter most to me are more perfect, and to me are greater than any treasure.
And yet you could walk into nature, and every living being that has a spirit in them that's sustained moment to moment by the creator is dependent upon you as this great chief in creation, walking almost like the creator to have restraint and not destroy their ability to live. So what you believe because of the circle you're sitting in, that you're wildly mediocre, but when you go into nature, all of nature looks at you and says, what magnificence. I hope he chooses to be nice. So you're very sacred and special too. And it's something to remember. It's just got goofed up. They have this technology that came along, and it was supposed to take what took 10 hours in a day, and we could do it in an hour. Instead of using that as an opportunity to give us more time to be with our families, someone said, well, then I'll consume 12 hours and make it so that they have no time with their families, and they don't even have enough to eat or enough to keep shelter over their head. And certainly the generations after them will be worse than they are. And yet, how is it possible? Because these systems made your ability to do more with less time. And yet now, then all of a sudden, you need both parents in the house working, and it's still not enough to keep the shelter or keep the food or to keep the transport or to have any time with your children. Is it a better way what's occurring? And then all of a sudden you realize to do this, and because you're doing things 100 times faster with this technology that now consumes more of your time than before, that all of a sudden you're actually now taking from your grandchildren who aren't born. And sitting there that you're going to be the last ones drinking fresh water, breathing fresh air. That now the discussion is to keep going faster and faster to go to another planet that's dead. How are those that bring death going to bring life?
The system we have now is not what it's meant to be. Pharaoh in Egypt, he was going hard on the people. And it wasn't just Jews. It wasn't just the Israelites who left. It was also many Egyptians that fled with them, people who sought a better way, the good life. And so my family just got home, so
Oh,
it may
gotta
get a
go.
little bit noisy, but
Are you
I
okay to
believe
keep
that
talking?
we do have a path to the good life.
Okay.
And so thank you.
You need to spend some time with your family. Yahweh, 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 Mamwigira mashkozimin nijwasing ishkode. Giburawe wad. Bushigo anishna bem yang mino bimadzi yang. Yahweh, 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 Yah. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yah. Mamwigira mashkozi men nijwasing ishkode. Giburawe wade. Bushigo anishna bem yang mino bi madzing yang. Yahweh, 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 Yah. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yah. I hope you like that. Hey, you might have heard a sound in there that sounds familiar.
This is
So this song is a unity song, and what it means, as I said in the beginning, is together we'll be strong, and that the seventh fire has been lit by us. And when they say seventh fire, just so you understand that it's symbolic also of there's 6 directions. There's what's to the east of you, to the south of you, to the west of you, to the north of you, above you, and below you. That's 6 directions, but the 7th direction is in your heart. We've lit the spirit inside of us. We know that this is real and true. It's more true than this. It's why you call yourself a Latter-day Saint.
But for closing with the video, I just want to mention, David, your name is David. I'm Jonathan. I am your friend. I'm a friend to you. We're brothers. But we're going to be the best friends.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.